Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. And in the news we're going to start out with is Pastor's been showing about this pharmaceutical industry and how it's about making money. It's not about helping people. It's not about healing people. It's not about sending people in the right direction. It's about making money. And remember, Pastor has brought forth and proven, yes, he's proven that this eating of pork, swine's flesh, it cuts the body down to where it can't produce certain chemicals, and it requires people to be put on insulin. And it shows how the drug companies are selling insulin, and the one example it gives is a 90-day supply costs $1,300 here in the United States. But they show you can go right across the border in Canada, and the same supply is $45. And then they show how to make it literally costs $2. So think about this, because it's even to the point now people can't afford. $1,300 is a lot of money. People can't afford to buy their insulin, so they're rationing the insulin, and they're dying. No one's told them this is what led to it. This is what caused it. They're only trying to make money off of them, and then they make as much as they can before they die, and then it's over. And then they move on to the next customer, or patient, as it says. But notice also this oppression to the people. People are crying out. And remember what was spoken of in Revelations 11:18, where it says, "And the nations were angry." Now that's the time of the end. That's the time where the dead will be also judged. But it shows in one nation, we're going to show Zimbabwe, Bolivia, Chile, Georgia, the Congo, Colombia, Palestine also continuing along with Hong Kong and other nations where all of these people being oppressed by the governmental system, the Nimrod system, the system outside the house of Yahweh, this place where people look and it's so desirable until you get a taste. And if you want to know what it's really like out there, watch what these people are saying. They're begging. You're going to see them beg. We want to change. We're tired of this. We can't handle this. It's too oppressive. When you look to a system and the leading cause of death out there amongst their military veterans, their police officers, their teenagers is suicide, it doesn't take much to know there's a massive problem going on out there, and it's not very joyful. They're begging for change. They don't know right now what they're begging for, but they're begging for the laws of Yahweh. That's the hope they're begging for, where they don't have the very basics of food, clothing, and shelter. The very basics of what every person in the house of Yahweh receives. It's not a right to someone in the world. You can do without, and no one will help you. You can do without the things you need, and they'll cast you aside. They'll let you sleep on the streets in 20-degree weather with no problem. And then moves on from there, showing Prime Minister Netanyahu has been indicted. Of course, that's continuing where they haven't certified a prime minister over there yet. Also, pastors brought out about space wars and this militarization of space. NATO also getting involved and saying that they're claiming their domain in space, and that as a group, as a large group, which is 29 countries NATO is, they're saying that they can control more. They can be the most dominant. And that's what everybody's looking to be, is the most dominant. And then Rick Perry, who's the former governor of Texas, he's presently the Secretary of Energy, but he's resigning at the end of the year for President Trump. He also acknowledges that he feels Trump is the chosen one to fulfill the plan of God, as he says. And that's through the decision-making that he's making. And, of course, this plan is to bring forth a nuclear war, and that's what's coming. Iran also. In Iran, they're having riots along with these other countries, and they know they're being instigated by the United States. Remember, the United States has put sanctions on Iran to pressure the people, so the people will suffer. They can't buy, sell, nor trade their oil. The people suffer. Those people are going to cry out to their leaders because they don't have the basic necessities, and they're even calling for the death of the Ayatollah in Iran. And Iran has told the United States, if this does not stop, we will destroy you. Now, in that same time, also notice in international waters, you have China, Russia, and Iran. They're having naval drills going on. They're taking place. And then continuing on, Pentagon confirms Russia built up in Syria. Now remember, Russia built up in Syria, and consider this, because this is something that come forth from the 7th Malach. Write down for your notes so you can go back and read the scripture in Revelations chapter 9, and start with verse 14, where it says, saying to the 6th Malach, or notice the 7th Malach, who sounds for the 6th time, which had the trumpet, yes, the trumpet, loose the 4 angels who are bound in the great river Euphrates. That took place on the 9th Roman month of the 9th day of 2006. But notice it says, and the 4 angels were loosened, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a moon, a month and a year, in order to slay a third part of men. And that number of army of the horsemen was 2,000,000, for I heard the number of them. Now that number, as Pastor has brought out, means 2 great armies. Not just 200,000, but 2 great armies. Well, right now you have in Syria, at the great Euphrates River. Remember also Revelation 6:6, hurt not the oil. You have Russia. You have the United States. They're building massive armies around the great Euphrates River saying, hurt not this oil. Everything that has been brought to bring us to this 1 hour burning, which remember, it takes a time period to get to the 1 hour burning. But we can see it. It's right before our eyes. Everything that was written in this mark of the beast over 40 years ago has been laid out for us. And even Pope Francis believes this. The last one you're going to see is Pope Francis begging nations to please abolish the nuclear weapons, because even he believes what the witness is saying. The nuclear burning is coming. And Malachi says, of course, that city that sits on 7 hills is going to burn. If we could please at this time go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news today, we have a lot of protests going on, including Chile, Georgia, Congo, and Colombia. Also, we have NATO wanting to claim some space, actually outer space, as part of their domain, and Iran issuing a very stern warning to the U.S. Do not cross this red line or else. So these and many more stories, but first we'd like to talk about insulin. Almost 7.5 million diabetics in the United States rely on some form of insulin to treat their illness, but the cost of the once inexpensive drug has gone out of control in recent years. Now, insulin is not only the most widely sold and used drug in America, but around the world. And at one time, it was the cheapest drug, selling for only 2 cents a unit.
Wow. Well, in 1923, Frederick Banting and Charles Best discovered insulin under the directorship of John McLeod at the University of Toronto. Dr. John Collop joined them and purified insulin to make it readily available for use by diabetic patients. Well, they were awarded an American patent for insulin, which they then turned around and sold it to the University of Toronto for just $1 each. Their thinking at the time was if they made the patent open for everyone to use, the insulin could reach everyone who needed it across the globe.
Well, today, however, that is not the case. The price of insulin, especially in the U.S., has skyrocketed. One bottle of insulin can cost as much as $450. Now, in other countries, the price is much more reasonable. For example, in Canada, that same vial might cost between $20 and $30. Now, according to the Healthcare Cost Institute, type 1 diabetics paid, on average, nearly $6,000 in 2016. Now, that was almost double what they paid in 2012. So the cost is continuing to rise.
Yeah. Well, legal journalist Molly Barrow was interviewed on RT News trying to shed some light on what is going on with this much-needed drug. Barrow said the reason insulin is so expensive is complicated, but in short, the U.S. law allows pharmaceutical companies to set their own prices and raise them as high as they want.
Well, she continued, and add to that, only 3 companies control 90% of the insulin market. Now, and they basically have an agreement where one company supplies insulin to one country, and that allows them to more or less establish a monopoly on prices, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Some countries like India and China have domestic companies producing insulin, which helps bring their prices down in the range of around $50 a month. But Big Pharma continues to cash in at Americans' expense.
Well, the trend that we are seeing now in America is that the cost of medicine is literally killing diabetics. Ms. Barrow spoke of one mother who lost her daughter to diabetes at the age 22. The woman who was paying $1,300 for a 90-day supply of insulin for her daughter was no longer able to receive juvenile medical assistance because she was over age. Even though she was working 2 jobs, her insurance wasn't enough to cover the cost, and she began to ration the insulin, which eventually led to her daughter's death.
Well, after a survey done this spring by T1 International, which advocates for insulin access and affordability, they found that 1 in 4 American diabetics are rationing their insulin. Now, the cost can range anywhere from $210 to over $1,000 each month for one person in the U.S. alone.
Yeah. The Kaiser Family Foundation recently did a survey and found that 19 million adults are importing their insulin from Canada, where it's still much cheaper. What's most disheartening about the whole situation is insulin still costs very little to produce. Well, Molly Barrow told RT, according to T1 International, it only costs a few dollars to make it, so the price just keeps getting jacked up the further it goes through the manufacturing and distribution process. So no really viable reason as to why people are paying so much on the tail end for a product that only costs a few bucks to make.
Right, and to think that it all started with a patent that was sold for $1, hoping to help people, and now it's turned into this.
Yeah.
Well, one would think that because the patent for most forms of insulin have expired, the prices wouldn't be able to be driven so high. But pharmaceutical companies take advantage of any and all loopholes in the U.S. patent system, using further patents to make the original patent last much longer. Now, the process is called evergreening, and as Barrow says, it prevents competition, which keeps prices from coming down.
Wow. Well, they also have pay for delay schemes, which is a patent dispute settlement where a generic manufacturer wants to start producing the drug, but they agree to wait to enter the market for a specified amount of time in return for payments from the patent holder. So, Barrow says it basically makes it legal for one insulin producer to pay another one not to enter the market again, and that controls the prices and affects the outcome of just how much people are paying.
Well, which in turn is causing diabetics to have to ration, and in worst cases, to decide whether to buy insulin or food.
Yeah, that puts people in a very difficult situation because, they need both those things to kind of balance their insulin within their body. And then, some people, it's just so out of whack that they have to have the insulin, and it just puts them in a pickle as to what are they going to be able to do.
Right, and 1 in 4 right now, as the report said, are rationing their insulin just because of the cost.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. Well, medication prices are not the only problem facing our world today. Many countries are looking for new leadership with solutions to their ever-growing social and economic problems. Well, we're going to look at a number of countries now who are added to the list of protesting nations, starting with Zimbabwe in southern Africa.
Well, they came to the capital of Harare to hear their opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, but supporters of the Movement for Democratic Change Party, or MDC for short, were greeted by riot police with batons and tear gas. Now, the rally was organized by Chamisa, head of the MDC party, in which he meant to address how he planned to help stabilize the country that is facing its worst economic crisis in more than a decade.
Wow. Currently, there are shortages of basic commodities like fuel and electricity, and over 60% of the people are food insecure due to drought and hyperinflation, which has caused food prices to go up 490%. Well, the MDC believes the current president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, and his government leaders have failed.
Well, a spokesman for Chamisa told Al Jazeera, the MDC is a large movement in this country. Now, it cannot be banned by another political party, and for that reason, we are ashamed that Mr. Mnangagwa would decide to use the military and the police the way he has done this morning. But the fact of the matter is, that's not going to change. It's not going to give him legitimacy, and it's not going to stop the MDC from moving forward with its problems and agenda.
Yeah, it's really sad because the citizens in these situations are the ones that really suffer the most. 490% increase in food. Well, mourners in Bolivia marched peacefully to La Paz with 8 coffins containing the victims of clashes with the military in El Alto earlier this week. The protesters were planning to hold a vigil at the presidential palace until police began firing tear gas at the procession, which included women and children. One van carrying coffins struggled to find its way out, while another was detained by police. Other mourners who had been carrying coffins had to set them on the ground and flee from the tear gas.
Well, the protesters did not resist or clash with police. They just fled from the tear gas, horrified and in shock. Now, they had marched for 4 hours from El Alto to La Paz, demanding the interim president, Janine Anaz's resignation. Now, after Anaz assumed the presidency, she passed the supreme decree that releases the military and police from any responsibility in securing peace in the country.
Well, the protesters blame the police for the deaths. A preliminary autopsy report reveals the 8 victims died after projectiles were fired at them. However, they are waiting for a further investigation. One woman named Lydia told reporters, "They're killing our people. There is no justice for our humble people."
Well, while the government wants security forces to bring peace to Bolivia, many there are upset and feel that their elected president was forced out of office, and the one that has taken over in the interim is against indigenous people. Now, in a deleted tweet from 2013, she referred to Aymara New Year celebration as satanic and recently said the Bible has returned to the palace. So far, 15 Bolivians have died in clashes with police since President Evo Morales resigned, seeking exile in Mexico and leaving the country in turmoil.
Well, we have some more information from our correspondent Larry McGee regarding more protests that we see taking place across the world, including in South America there. Colombia is experiencing some of those things. And, of course, these uprisings are continually spreading throughout many, many countries. Larry, what do you have for us?
Amid the sea of agitation and turmoil currently seething and churning throughout the nations, the waves of distress and unrest are also crashing on the shores of Chile, Georgia, the Congo, and Colombia. Chilean protesters have reportedly taken to the streets for 5 weeks to decry police brutality and oppression, often resorting to violence against the police themselves, using rocks, sticks, and Molotov cocktails. Many of the demonstrators are of the nation's youth, who see no future for themselves in Chile's current state, where ordinary citizens are shackled with debt and all of the person's basic needs, such as water, have been privatized and sold off to various business interests by corrupt politicians. Other young people within the nation identify the target of their rage as a system within the country designed to further enrich the rich, while bird feeding the masses of the poor with the nation's crumbs. In their frustration, protesters have resorted to violence in the false hope that fear will shake up Chile's elite and win their cause. And though they realize that their misguided aggression could bring them judicial troubles, at this point, they feel like they have little to lose. In the little nation of Georgia, the tentacles of the global push for democratization are starting to appear as demonstrators crowded the boulevards of the nation's capital to protest what they believe is a failure of the government to enact promised democratic reforms. The protesters' concerns have to do specifically with the country's electoral process, which they say is flawed and is being used and manipulated by certain parties to remain in office. The small nation has a long history of unrest since its separation from the Soviet Union in 1991, including the overthrow of 2 of its presidents and a war with Russia in 2008. A mere visit by a diplomat from Moscow sparked more outrage outside the country's parliament just this year. The rage of those in the Congo running through the streets in hordes is aimed at the United Nations. The organization has a presence in the country, but is not seen by the people as keeping them safe from the dangers they face from Congolese and Ugandan rebels who have been attacking, kidnapping, and murdering parts of the population. In a scenario reminiscent of Rwanda, protesters are saying if not to keep us safe, then why are UN peacekeepers here? The demonstrators promise to continue with unrest until they have a solution against the killing. They say it is unacceptable to see people killed while the UN forces are present. Crowds of people are tired and expressing dissatisfaction with the present state of affairs in Colombia. Colombian dissidents, who were reportedly inspired by similar protests surging throughout the region, organized protests in Bogota and other cities to denounce the same economic inequities and political ineptitude as citizens in other South American nations. Though protesters clashed with police as the demonstrations collapsed into chaos, demonstrators expressed resolution rooted and charged ironically by their exhaustion. They are tired of being marginalized, tired of being disappeared. Now, they say, it is time for change. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Good time, Jeff. Back to you.
Well, you can certainly hear in that man's voice from Congo the hardship that these people are suffering. And as he said, it's time for a change. Right. Well, we also have some more footage of the ongoing Colombian protests as the citizens continue to uprise in the streets. Take a look at this video.
Wow, just absolute chaos right there, absolute chaos. Well, the next video might be disturbing to some of our viewers, so just want to make you aware of that. What you're about to see is the aftermath of what a rubber bullet does to the face of a Palestinian journalist at the hands of Israeli soldiers. Let's take a look.
That incident right there, although it was a journalist, that's actually something that occurs quite often. Right. Those rubber bullets causing that type of damage, being hit by them. Well, staying in that area, Israel's Attorney General has decided to indict the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, on multiple corruption charges. Netanyahu has said that he is not guilty of any of these charges, and this in the midst of Israel's current political stalemate.
Foreign ministers from across the NATO alliance will meet in Brussels to address several topics, including space and the Turkish assault on Syria. NATO has been under some intense scrutiny over the past several years, including criticisms from U.S. President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron. During a speech for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, U.S. Head of Space Command General John Raymond urged NATO allies to move beyond traditional information and work together with the U.S. for joint space operations.
Well, General Raymond said that NATO is about to declare space as an operational domain. We're stronger together, and I think it's beneficial to develop capabilities that's mutually beneficial. And if we want to deter from a position of strength, and that's been the core of NATO to deter. That's what he said. So I really believe it gets to that foundation. Now, ministers will also focus on European security efforts, anti-terrorist actions, hybrid threats, Russia, China, which of course is very big, which they're focusing on, arms control, and the energy security.
Well, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said regarding NATO and space, it's about communications, it's about navigation, it's about data imagery. Space is essential for almost everything we do. Well, Stoltenberg is also planning to travel to France to meet with Macron, who recently commented that NATO is experiencing brain death.
Well, Stoltenberg also said the strength of NATO is that despite our differences, we've always been able to unite around our core cause and defend each other, and it is the responsibility of all allies to make sure that we do this today because we live in uncertain and unpredictable world, and in uncertain times, we need strong multilateral institutions like NATO.
U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, said that NATO is essential to assessing risk together and that facing risk alone is not even rational. The 29-member NATO is facing politics over the Turkish troops in northern Syria that are challenging Kurdish forces.
Well, U.S. Secretary of Energy and former Texas Governor Rick Perry is calling U.S. President Trump the chosen one. Now, he said in an interview with Fox and Friends regarding the statement to the president after Trump's announcement that he was the chosen one, Perry said to the president, "You are, if you're a believing Christian in God's plan for the people who rule and judge over us on this planet in our government." Now, Perry also said that Trump was sent by God to do great things.
Iran's leader of its Revolutionary Guard is warning the U.S. and its allies if it crosses its red line, they will be destroyed. Iran is dealing with nationwide protests protests over increase in fuel prices. Iran is blaming the U.S. for the demonstrations despite the fact that Iran raised food prices and fuel prices. Well, Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane said that these actions exacerbated the situation because the economy in Iran, the people, they're already squeezed tight, and the only ones that are spared are the elite. There was a 50%, he said, increase in gas prices.
Well, those increases brought the Iranian people out not seen in over 40 years. People from over 100 cities simultaneously came out in protest blaming the regime for the current state of the economy, knowing that the regime took most of the money from the nuclear deal with the Obama administration, which was $130 billion, and poured most of that into their military operations. Now, lastly, he said that he believes that Iran will use military operations to disrupt the oil flow to affect the world economy, try to create a recession that would pressure the U.S. to remove sanctions. But down the road, the only exit they really have is some kind of deal with the United States.
Well, the Pope made some comments recently regarding nuclear weapons and their use on a 4-day trip to Japan to visit the one country hit with 2 atomic bombs during World War II in 1945. Now, many people there in Japan died instantly as a result of the blast, while others still suffer many years later from the effects of nuclear radiation. Well, he has condemned the possession of nuclear weapons by any country, saying, "Possessing nuclear arms is an indefensible, perverse dichotomy." He stressed that nuclear doctrine ferments a climate of fear, distrust, and hostility. Yeah, and it's interesting, that the Pope's visiting and referring to the nuclear weapons that create, this fear and distrust, where we also see the fear and distrust from the people regarding their governments, because there's a lot of oppression that's taking place there. The wealth that is available, that should be made available to the people so that they can have their basic needs, aren't being met. There's an increase in food prices and fuel prices. Basic, necessities aren't being given to the people. And so a lot of them are uprising right now, like we're seeing throughout South America, African continent, Asia, and so forth, the protests taking place in Hong Kong. And the government really isn't offering any solutions, just taking away the responsibility or the liability of their law enforcement to secure the peace of the country.
Right, and those sanctions, though, like the sanctions that the U.S. put on Iran, were designed to do that very thing, to get the people, as we saw there, to rise up against the regime and, basically protest as they're doing, saying, hey, you need to do something different. So it causes a chaos and it disrupts the country. Of course, the people are really the ones that suffer, not the ones that are well off to begin with, or those up in the higher offices. But the people are the ones that suffer. Of course, that's what puts the pressure on, as you said, the governments, to make the change. But a lot of times that change is, well, do what we want or else.
Right. Well, there are changes that are available, options that are available, not only to the people of our great world, but also to the leaders who are tasked with the responsibility of governing them. Yisrael Hawkins and the House of Yahweh has been bringing forth solutions of change for many years, and you can find out what you can do to help yourself, and if you are a world leader, help your country to have a better life. Contact the House of Yahweh, and of course when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. You can also ask about the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit us by going to our website at YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. Any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And once again, please go and check out the Yisrael Says program by going to YisraelSays.com and the Ask Yisrael program by going to AskYisrael.com. You can do word searches, you can put questions in there, phrases, guaranteed to bring up pages and pages of information that will occupy your time reading the Holy Scriptures and enlightening your knowledge on the truth that comes forth from the House of Yahweh.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, with another great and informative message, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Hermerman.
Thank you for watching.
At this time, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrael, Abel Hawkins.
Well, the cold weather didn't stop you, I said. Praise Yahweh. Please be seated. Yahweh's peace be with you, with each and every one of you. I thought maybe the cold might drive a bunch of the heathen in, but maybe not. We got 3 more months. That's of this cold weather, and then the great feast of Passover. I'd like for you to praise Yahweh. I'd like for everyone listening to me out there, you need to get this in your mind. You really need to be here by Passover. Praise Yahweh. And I really don't expect it, really don't expect the wars until the next Passover. But it wouldn't hurt. It would be a great boost to you with Yahweh to start keeping his feast. This, I know Christianity did away with them, but the Catholic Church did away with Yahweh's laws. But if you'll read your scriptures, you'll see that they're forever. In Isaiah 66, it says, from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another. That includes the feast days. The feast days is a shadow from things to come. That's Psalms 91. Get the sermon. Get all of it. Learn it. You've got to learn it. It takes a while, but what you need is get your mind off of play, wasting your time. You could be learning just by reading the Book of Israel or the newsletters we put out. Last week, I did bring I just touched on it. The space has become, they say, they use the name of a god there and say may soon come, but it's already come, and that's what he's telling about in this article. It started several years ago with the Catholic Church and NATO, as is mentioned in this article, but space has already become a war zone. Here's how that took place. Here's how it would work. Well, it's going to take place. It has taken place. It's already in place. They got the technology for it. And the United States started it years ago, and the other nations are about to catch up. The outer space. Now, in Kepha, 2 Kepha 3:10 through 12, it says the heavens are going to melt with fervent heat. The same book that contains this prophecy contains the prophecy that we would have bombs in this generation only. This generation only. It took almost 6,000 years to get those bombs here, but they're here. And it was broadcast for this generation only. Now, a person is a little bit stupid, looks to me like, to see these prophecies come to pass this way. We got the bomb that'll darken the sun. We have the bombs that'll burn the earth in 1 hour, as Revelations 18 says. Burn the earth, darken the sun. Matthew 24:29. We've got them. They were written thousands of years ago for this generation, and Yeshua said, Matthew 24, or Matthew 24, if you have a King James Bible, that generation, when you see it, it's not going to pass away till it's fulfilled. Well, we're in the last part of it. We're in the last part. I've got so many different ways to prove that to you, but you really need to be studying and catching up. If you get the latest newsletters, get the latest Book of Israel and then go backwards from there. But put your time into study. Don't just read it, study it with your scriptures, with the Book of Yahweh. This guy said at an upcoming summit in early December, that's next month, got that? Next month, is expected to declare NATO, you got to get that in your mind. That's the Pope's army. And of course, this has been years in the making, and they've gathered power from different nations to back them up. So he says, at an upcoming summit in early December, NATO is expected to declare space a war-fighting domain, partly in response to new developments in technology. If it does declare space a war zone next month, NATO could start using space weapons that can destroy satellites or incoming enemy missiles. But what is that technology, and how could it enable a war in space? I'm going to save the rest of that because I want to bring you a little bit about NATO, who started it and who's running it today, and their loyalty, not really loyalty. Each nation that's involved in this is wanting certain things. And allies are this way. They want, if they guarantee they're going to be your ally, they have contracts written. Now, if you've ever read a contract from the Vatican, it's very unclear. The statements they make can be interpreted in different ways. And sometimes the book is so thick that no one reads it. So that's the grounds they stand on. And then here's your ally expecting to get a certain thing. We get started in a war, and the ally says, we're not getting what we're supposed to get. So they turn against. And this is what's going to take place in this time period. And the wars they're going to be fought from space. And a big portion of it, they can right now, the United States has developed satellites